If you are happy and you never have sex again, I'm actually happier about that than if you get laid a lot and you're not happy with your life.
Welcome back to my little spot here on YouTube. My guest today is also one of my teachers, and much of what I and others admire about her is not just the depth of her wisdom, but for the way she lives that wisdom in real time. Kendra Cunov is a teacher, a guide, a fierce stand for embodied truth and relational integrity. And she has spent the last 2 decades exploring authentic communication and connection, intimacy, leadership, and presence. And what I love most about her is the way that she brings her radical honesty and a deep compassion into all the spaces I've seen her in, whether she's holding a retreat, coaching a client, or just in a conversation, or co-teaching in my community of the John Wineland teacher training program where we initially met. There is a grounded spaciousness that she offers, which allows people to feel safe and seen and more connected to their own truth. This is my experience of Kendra Cunov, and I'm so excited for you to experience her heart and her brilliance today. Welcome, Kendra Cunov.
Thank you so much.
Good to get an opportunity to dive in a little deeper with you in ways that I haven't always had the opportunity to. And I thought that maybe we can start with the question I love asking people, and this is, what is something from your childhood or something from your family of origin that has impacted who you are in the world and the work that you're doing now?
For a long time, when I would talk to people, what they would focus on is that I was raised in a Zen Buddhist monastery. And it was always like, what was that like? And that must have been the thing. And it took me a long time. I thought, it's not that that didn't have an impact. There's absolutely an impact from being raised in a community of practice. We lived in the middle of the Ventana wilderness. The monastery I grew up in is literally an hour over a dirt road, and it ends in that valley, and we didn't have electricity. And even when we left, my mom and I lived until I was 11, still up the dirt road. We had an outhouse, we had kerosene lamps. And growing up in that way with that kind of, darkness at night and a wood stove and no electricity and the quiet, I think that that has deeply impacted who I am. And of course, I was young. So again, sometimes people will ask you, like, what was that like? And I always want to say, like, I was a kid. So I think however we grow up, we think is normal. And then when we left, not to say that we were totally isolated, but it was a very distinct leaving of community and kind of living. It was just me and my mom. We couldn't see any other houses from where we lived. And that was pretty dramatic.
What would you say is the thing that is most central to your heart right now, since we've jumped from your
Mm-hmm.
childhood and then do a fast forward to this moment, and then maybe we fill in the gaps in between. Right now, what's currently on your heart and your mind in terms of your expression in the world, your impact?
In some ways, it is partly just that inquiry, even of what's most important. I feel like I'm kind of in that transitional. It's a particular transitional phase of life. My kids are teenagers. I'm 47. That's like, wait, what feels most important now? And the ways that that sometimes feels very much about what I want to teach or my impact, and then the ways that it seems like, does that even matter? I mean, I think of everything as a relationship. So where we met specifically in the teacher training program, and that realm has a lot of emphasis on man-woman dynamics or masculine-feminine dynamics, has a lot around sexual polarity, romantic, and it certainly has a community aspect to it. And we sort of speak to that, but the focus of the teaching has a lot to do with intimate relationship. And in most of my other work, I would say that comes like third. And it obviously is central to many people's lives. And it's central to my life in a lot of ways too. But I like to look at this idea of really we're just in relationship with everything all the time. And so putting our attention on the relationship between, just between, I don't even want to say between what and what, like the relationship between is what's most interesting. And then one of the places I think that doesn't get as much attention as it could does have to do with earth and land and place.
Because you share your writing and I read your emails and the things that you're thinking about. And I recognize that your perspective and your position and your commitment is so much larger than that.
Mm.
And so I love that you named that and also recognize that in some ways that makes it challenging for me to figure out, okay, where do we go? Which is partly how I experience my own life too, because there's certain areas that I'm focused in, that I'm committed to, that feel super important, but they feel like one little part of a mosaic that's such a larger piece.
I mean, I think that's true about everybody.
For sure,
Which,
for sure.
yes, and which is why I think sometimes it's like this idea of focusing is so important, and niching, and you go here for this, and focus really does have value.
Yeah.
And I think it does really impact the way that I work with people, because it is that sense. I'm like, I can't possibly just talk to you about your intimate relationship. That touches everything. I can't possibly just talk to you about your business. It matters if you have children. It matters whether they're leaving the house or whether they're in the house. It matters whether you're married or divorced. It matters where like all these things matter, and they have impact, and it's like a web.
I just interviewed a friend of mine, Christine Marie Mason, yesterday, and she has a quote in her book that says something like, the mycelial web of the world has us infinitely connected in all of the ways. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I do think
Yes.
there's something about that, like all the tendrils fitting together, and
Yeah.
we can't separate ourselves, or no matter how much the marketing messages are always, you have to niche down and have
Yeah.
one pointed focus and specialize. If we're really connected to our wholeness, to all
Yes.
that we are, how do we separate ourselves from these mycelial, tendrils?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Something I like to think about when I'm getting to know someone or interviewing them is, and this sort of goes back to, we started, we're moving quickly through time, but we started in your childhood and then we went to what's important now. And the concept of superpower to me is the idea of that skill set or strength or gift that has been with us for our entire lives, regardless of the age, or the stage, that is so natural to us that we might not even know it unless it's been reflected to us by others saying, wow, you are always this. And I'm wondering what comes to your mind when I put that out to you, of that thing that's been a constant presence as one of your gifts. So it's one of the elements and characteristics that you bring to the world.
When you say that, and the way you talk about it has me kind of go back to like childhood and start to percolate. But I was in a group where there was kind of that question. And I just remember thinking, like, I don't have that. And there was another woman in the group that was like, what are you talking about, Kendra? You're always, and it's exactly what you said. And it really had to do with that it's not this or this, like and not even that it's in the middle, right? But that there's this more winding path that includes more than just this or this. And it really was one of those things where I was like, oh, I look at everything like that so thoroughly that I didn't even know I was doing it. And I don't know if that's from my Buddhist upbringing. I mean, it is very like middle way kind of talking.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't know that I never felt like I was like taught Buddhism. We didn't have, the Sunday school equivalent. And I can't imagine that I wasn't infused in that, having spent my early years there, going back as a teenager, I went back as an adult. And I think there really was just that sense of that it is more, that like there's more to this.
Mm.
Anyone who spends any amount of time with me is going to hear me be like, well, it's not just this, or like, if we only have two options, we know we're wrong, or just various ways of saying that.
It's seeing all the grays in between the black and the white.
And I think then it goes with that idea of wholeness that you brought in, because there's often this idea of like that we're just not telling a good enough story, right? We're telling the negative story and we need to be telling the positive story. I just think we're not telling a complete enough story. So I could tell the story of my childhood in all the ways that it was hard, and they would all be true. And then I could tell the story of my childhood in all the ways that it was blessed, and they would all be true. And so then, am I able actually to tell the complete story, which in some way is what you said, like the grays of it, but it's just, oh, can I tell the truth about all of it? Rather than going, oh, what I need to do is focus on the positive, or I'm too focused on the negative, or I need to remember the negative things so that I can heal from my trauma, or blah, 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 blah. I don't know. Can I just tell the whole story to the best of my ability in any moment, you know?
It brings up the question of then how do we orient? What do we orient around? Because
Mhm.
there's almost like an existential piece of that's everything. How do you relate? How do you relate and interact with and step
Right.
forward and talk about
Yeah.
something when you're trying to involve everything? How do you orient around that kind of
Yeah, I didn't see
bigness?
that movie, but I think of what is it called? Like
Everything,
all at
everything,
once or
always.
something
And
like, yeah. And people said it was really overwhelming. I was like, yeah, I don't think I wanted to go do that.
that was my experience.
So sometimes, if we're talking about a certain thing, over time, it's really the wholeness piece, right? Is over time for ourselves to notice, am I kind of caught in one channel? This is also true. You may have even heard me say this in teacher training, right? I'll talk about like authenticity is often just what we call it's habit that we've grown so accustomed to. We call it authenticity, or like that's just me, or that's just the way I am, or that's not me, right? Like, well, I'm just not the kind of person who. Um, and so I do think over time, not trying to do in every moment everything all the time,
Right.
but over time, kind of recognizing, oh, it's easier for me to express sadness than it is to express joy, or I'm more comfortable talking about what's good in my life than I am talking about blah, 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 like, okay, they're like um, grooves that are worn into a stone by water over time. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong or that it's an untrue place for the water or my attention or my emotions to go. It just means that it's diverting in a habit way. And there's other things that are also true that need a little more airtime. And so then choosing at times to go into the places that are less familiar as a way of painting the whole picture. So I think, kind of in response to your specific question, is like, okay, no, it's not that I need to say everything. I mean, I have this problem, and maybe you do too. Sometimes I start to talk and I'm like, I sort of short circuit because I can actually see and feel everything that it connects to. And I'm like, well, I can't say everything, so maybe I'll say nothing. So I do think that's where focus comes in, to be able to, whether it's a conversation, um, a line of focus for myself, a specific teaching, right? Even to come in and go, okay, so there's a lot of other pieces to this, and the one I'm going to focus on right now is this.
Mhm.
And in that way, for my own self and whoever else is involved, it orients like, hey, I'm not saying this is the only thing. I'm focusing on this on purpose right now for a reason, and we can address these other pieces later. And that happens everywhere. I mean, that happens in conversations with people too, right? Like we have a focus, and then suddenly, or we have a conflict in a relationship, and we bring up one thing, and then suddenly we're talking about something that happened 10 years ago, and it's like, wait, what happened to the focus? So to be able to say, actually, we're just going to focus on this, and I recognize that we're excluding things on purpose, is also valuable.
I was coaching someone on that exactly this morning, is that when we're humans who have a lot of things that we care about, a lot of things that we know about, a lot of things that we want to share about, and then we want to gift to our clients, to the world, there are often many things that coming in all at the same time. And that desire, and I'm talking about specifically around speaking and communication, which you just referenced,
Mm-hmm.
there's this tendency of wanting to say, I want to say that, and I need to say that, and I need to say this. And in order for you to get the whole picture, I need to say this other piece too. And it can short circuit us.
Yes.
What I'm hearing is that your answer to the question is that we be authentic in the moment and trust that in the vast scheme of things, all the moments together paint a picture, but that all we can be with in any one moment is that one thought or that one truth or that one experience.
Yeah, and that there is real value on focusing on purpose.
Yeah.
And that it is important then for our wholeness as humans to recognize, are we consistently focusing in the same directions, right?
Yeah.
and to expand our range, not because those other ways are better, but because they're also true parts of us.
And not to lose that thread that you brought in, I think is really important, which is that the moments that we pick over time can be habituated, and that
Yeah,
there's always the opportunity to expand our range.
I agree.
Yeah. And can be done in so many ways.
I mean, I even thought about it when I got on and you had this beautiful lipstick on, and I was like, oh yeah, like I haven't worn bright lipstick in a long time. And that's not that's not one of the places I'll habitually go. I won't unless I make an active gesture. And so these things, they can seem so small and inconsequential.
Mhm.
And there was a period of time where one of my practices every day, I was to wear lipstick every day for a full lunar cycle because I won't think of it if I don't do it that way. And then I had to meet, I mean, the thing again, we go like, well, why does lipstick matter? But I had to meet the parts of me that then were uncomfortable,
Yeah.
feeling seen in a certain way or being a little bit louder or, I was like, oh, so I'm meeting new parts of myself that are actually quite deep and tender
Mhm.
through a seemingly shallow practice of wearing lipstick every day for a full lunar cycle.
I love that you mentioned that. One of my very dear friends and also a previous guest on my podcast named Crystal Celeste, she has a practice that she calls the red lip revolution. And it's specifically the practice of women coming together in sisterhood, practicing wearing red lipstick to see what it brings up in our viewpoint. I'm not that person. I'm not the type of person who wears red
Yeah.
lipstick,
Yeah.
or how can I wear red lipstick if I'm going to pick up my kids from school, and what are people going to think of me, and all the
Yeah.
associations. And I think it's a really beautiful example of the ways that we can stretch ourselves out of our comfort zone, because and it's just one example. There are so many ways we could do it.
I mean, it's infinite. But what's beautiful is that because you started this with it being embodiment, and
Mhm.
that actually is embodiment.
Mhm.
So we could do all this deconstructing in our minds. And I'm not to, again, to say that that's not valuable at all, but never actually have to meet the part of ourselves that thinks there is a type of woman who wears red lipstick. And we'd be
Right.
like, well, I don't really think that. I took feminist studies in college and I've deconstructed. And it's like, okay, I've done some of that. And then I put it on and I find in an embodied way all the parts that it still actually lives in me.
uh
Yeah.
Love that. I love that. Yeah, and we could also talk about stage of life. During the period of time when I was raising my kids, there was probably 8 years. I was a homeschooling mother. I ran a big homeschooling group. There was probably 8 years I didn't wear makeup, I barely brushed my hair, and I didn't wear jewelry. And I remember feeling like, oh, what if I took on skincare as an anointment of my own value? And instead of just doing skincare, that I did it as a practice. And when I put my earrings on, that I did it as a practice of stretching outside of the view of myself that I'd gotten into.
I mean, I imagine it's slightly different, the homeschool community that you were part of. But I wrote a piece about this too, of living at the Zen monastery as an adult. And then this idea that wearing like shabbier clothes or not makeup or what have not like doing your hair is more authentic rather than it can actually be like group mentality just as much, right? Like there was definitely a shabby chic that was totally en vogue in the monastery, and it would have been really out of, context to wear fancy clothes or fancy shoes or red lipstick. I actually had a girlfriend that I'm still friends with, and we were roommates our first summer at Tassajara as adults. And when we stayed during practice period, one of the things we used to do was paint our toenails with sparkly nail polish because you can't wear shoes in the meditation hall. And people would see it was like this little act of rebellion.
We're wearing sparkly nail
I
polish.
know.
Woohoo!
With all the black robes and yeah.
I don't know how this would tie together, but I guess I'm also tying it together with the conversation I had with Christine yesterday, who, I hope she watches your episode and you watch her episode, because I love it when the people that I know get to know each other. And she is an amazing woman. She wrote this book called The Nine Lives of Women,
Mm,
the sensual and sexual and reproductive experiences of women from birth to 100.
Mm.
And it talks about the different stages of life. And I'd love to hear a little more about your experience at the stage of life that you're at right now, because it's a stage that I know a lot of women in our communities are in. And I know it's a kind of a hard question because you're in it, but what's your
Mhm.
experience of being the stage of life that you're at now? You have lived all these different lives, and what's your
Yeah.
perspective of the stage that you're at right now in the, in the trajectory?
Really does make me want to go check that out in terms of 9 stages, right? We get really into this, like there's only three, or I mean, again, you're even like a step ahead of me in this, but where I'm at, I see women have babies and immediately, sort of step into like motherhood teachings. And I'm like, oh, girl, like that's barely, literally giving birth is the entryway to the portal that is motherhood. It is actually not even the portal itself, right? Like you have only just even begun the motherhood journey. And I think having that perspective helps me a little bit now to feel like, oh, I think I'm at the entryway to the portal that is whatever this next stage is. Like I'm not even really in it. I don't even, I mean, again, you're sort of actually past this. You might have more to say about it, but I imagine this thing of, I mean, I still have my cycle regularly. It's getting shorter and shorter. And whatever that time is of actually no longer bleeding, to me, again, that feels like just the entryway into what's next. So like I'm barely at the entryway of what will become. And I think of it a little bit like the transitional seasons, like fall. It's a little more like fall. And there's something that's uncomfortable about transitional seasons, right? It's neither here nor there. My body is kind of neither where it has been or where it's going to go. Um, and a lot of my practice of embodiment is a lot of what it means to be in a body that feels awkward.
Mm.
Like, oh, this is actually challenging. And I think, again, we like to think embodied means uh, pleasurable, or if you're embodied, then you have the nice moves, and again, we would like to think that we don't think this, but we do actually feel this way a lot, or we see someone move easily and we think that means they're more embodied than me,
Mm.
rather than like, well, what does it mean to embody awkwardness? To actually bring the the beingness, or like that I'm in the different parts of my body, whether they feel good or they don't feel good, or they feel easy or they feel awkward, or I like them or I don't like them, or they're moving the way I want them to, or acting the way I want them to, or not, right? Can I inhabit the body I'm in right now in
Mm.
this kind of awkward? And my daughter is totally going, like she's 12, and I'm like, oh, we are such mirrors. Like this, I see how awkward it is for her, and I feel that awkward a lot.
Mm. Wow, that's beautiful. Being in transition is a very different stage and
Yeah.
experience of being in the next one.
It is the place where, at least personally, and it is kind of the gesture that I do want to make towards women in this phase, is like, can we stay with the transition? And so I don't want to make it like medical or not medical, like it's a polarized option, but to look a little bit more at that deeper energetic, like, am I trying to rush through what is awkward?
Mhm.
And because it's hard, and I don't want to discount at all that it is actually hard,
Mhm.
and in this culture especially, it's extra hard. So I don't want to minimize that in any way, and it again is not moral, but to take something to try to like fix it to get from here to here, or to not go through the transition, I think is a real loss.
I want to talk about devotion because the email that you wrote about devotion is the one that I knew at some point I was going to ask you to come on my show, but that was the one that was like, okay, now this is the time. And I guess the reason is because one of the pieces that I feel I have received from teacher training program, from being in the program, is more of a sense of what devotion, more of a embodied experience of devotion. And that was such a beautiful email you wrote. And so I want to talk a little bit about devotion, and specifically you mentioning in that email that one of the missing pieces is devotion. Like the often, I think did you call it undevotion or devotion, something about a devotion gap, something like
I
that.
think I said there's people are sort of like underdevoted and
Under devoted, that's it.
yeah, overcommitted and underdevoted.
Yeah, talk a bit about that.
A lot of that came from sort of seeing almost like a subtle conflation of commitment and devotion. And I mean, I have sort of a complex relationship with the idea of masculine and feminine, because again, I mean, it's like how we started where, you pull in one thread, you're just going to end up, you're going to be like, this no longer makes sense. So I think it's quite valuable in a certain way, but I think sometimes people will then say like, well, commitment is the masculine, devotion is the feminine. I'm like, I don't know if I think that's true. I'm pretty sure I don't. I think there is this thing, and there's a way that devotion really needs to be the bedrock, and that commitments need to come from devotion. So when we do it the other way around, it's where we often either things get really dry, like we're keeping our commitments, but we're like, why am I living? Basically, why am I keeping my commitments? What is it actually doing? Or it's hard to keep commitments. We're sort of like, because either we're a little bit more in that free flow and we're like, I don't feel it, so why would I keep it? And when we start with like, oh, what is this? And sometimes I think we can name it with words, and it does get tricky because sometimes I think people can't name it, and that we need to name that that's okay. But if you can feel like if there's something that you can actually anchor, oh, I can feel what I'm devoted to. And these commitments serve that. There is the sense of, oh, when I don't want to do this, the devotion can carry me through. I'm like, oh, I don't really want to keep that commitment, but actually I can feel the way that it's serving the devotion. And it's almost like the wave that kind of carries through, like, oh yes, I can do that. I mean, this is that yes and thing that I do. I'm like, or we will realize that it was the wrong commitment, or it has become the wrong commitment, and it no longer serves that. But we're willing to break a commitment in a different way than just like, well, it's just not authentic for me anymore, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not feeling it, or it's just not my truth right now. In a more casual way, it's like, oh, actually, this no longer serves what I'm devoted to, or I was mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And there's almost like a radical responsibility that comes, right? Like, oh, there might actually be consequences from this, but I understand that those too are in service of what I'm devoted to, because I'm changing course in service of that. And so it just has like a deeper tenor.
So that can be for some people listening abstract.
And in the biggest sense, I would say it's about belonging.
Mhm.
And that has been a thread that I've been naming for a while, but I think it was there before I could name it.
Mm.
And so I think there's a connection. I mean, this is where it's going to get a little tangential, but there's a connection between our devotion and our transmission in the world. And I think of that again deeper than what we get to say or teach, right? So deeper than our projection is this sense of both evoking and invoking that in our lives. And so if I take it to belonging, that there was something, I can't remember how you described it, but when you were introducing me, there was this part of me that exhaled, and I was like, oh, good. That's how I want people to feel around me. So I love it when, people say something and I'm like, oh, good. Not just because it's nice, but it's also like, that is actually how I want people to feel around me. I want people to feel welcomed. I want people to feel more connected to themselves. I want it to have this sense of, I think you said something around spaciousness, or like that it's a compassion that's like, oh, you're okay. But it's not like, oh, you're okay. So I'm like, yes, I want people to feel like this. And to me, these are aspects of belonging, right? I want the experience of being around me, ultimately to have people feel more connected to where they are, which is their own body, their own place on earth, who they are. And then I would assert that it requires that I also be practicing that. It can't just be like, I want the people around me to feel more belonging, and I want to teach about belonging, and I want to make sure people get belonging around me, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what? Like I'm at a loss. And so the devotion to cultivating that experience, both in the subtler transmission around me, in what I actually offer or project, and then also within myself, guides a lot of my decisions.
Mm.
Again, all the way from daily practice that might look like devotion and how I choose, and then the commitments that I make and how I spend my time and what I say yes to and what I say no to, and the commitments I carry through on and the ones I say, like, I'm sorry, I know I said I'd do that, I can't do that anymore, are often passed through that lens.
Like being devoted to authenticity as a path to belonging within the self, the body, and
Yeah.
belonging maybe in connection to another, belonging inside of a community.
Yes.
A sort of related question, I guess, is why you mentioned that polarity and the polarity work isn't necessarily your broader commitment.
Yeah.
So why do you teach in teacher training?
That's a great question. I mean, I want to make this note because this is, in a way, this is longstanding for me. I used to teach a program with my ex-husband called the Authentic Man Program. And I remember saying to this group of men, basically, I was like, I actually don't care if any of you ever get laid again. Like, I know that's why you're here, but I'm actually committed to something more than that. And so, like, if what you find is this deeper sense of belonging, like of yourself, if you find this community, if you're happy, if you are happy and you never have sex again, I'm actually happier about that than if you get laid a lot and you're not happy with your life, right? They're not at odds. I'm not saying those two things are at odds. So to me, that's where polarity goes sometimes.
Mhm.
And it is challenging for me. I mean, I went to my very first David Data workshop ever in like 1999 in Marin. So I don't know. I just feel like I've watched a lot of cycles of this, and polarity become the thing, and then polarity become the demon, and then polarity. I'm kind of like, it's like, sex isn't going to go anywhere. Polarity is not going to go anywhere. But there's a way that I see people get hyper focused on it that I cannot. I just like I don't care.
Mhm.
But teacher training, I feel like it has this in around polarity, and people get hooked into that. And it's so much deeper than that,
Yeah.
that I care about what happens in teacher training.
Mm. I think it's kind of like there's the pull, like getting laid, or like polarity, or, sexuality or intimacy. And then there's the underneath piece, which is actually about expanding the range of who you are,
Yeah.
what you have access to, seeing beyond the immediate person in front of you to the larger ways we're connected to everyone and all,
Yeah.
the lineages, all these underneath things. That's kind of like when I do speaking coaching, I say, well, I'm really working with speaking coaching, but I'm actually working with people on who they're being in the world and what their presence is. Like there's
Yeah.
always the stealthy part underneath it. That's the real essence. And so I think that's what you're saying, is that it's really the essential underneath parts in teacher training.
And in a way, by keeping somebody focused, you are able to dive deeper into all these other things that are important. And in some way, almost anything could be an access point to everything.
Mhm.
And so then it's just, where do we want our access points to be?
Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that
Mm.
feels really present for you right now, or something that you think is important? Let me ask this in two different ways. You can answer however you want. One
Mhm.
is something that's current right now that feels really important to you, and and precious and important to name. Or the other way I'd ask it
Mhm.
is if you were going to die tomorrow, what would you want to leave behind?
It's so interesting. It's like a circuitous way to come at it, but I thought of this when you asked also kind of how to make devotion more tangible. And I want to tell a little bit this story of this land that I bought up at Shasta, because people like the idea of devotion and want to feel and offer it, and have fear, basically be afraid, but what if nothing ever happens? Or what if I don't accomplish what I want to accomplish through this? And I think sometimes we have to be willing to let it take longer to find out what can actually be accomplished through like magic and devotion.
Mm.
Um, but this land, in that way, I mean, I would say for me, it started about 20 years ago when I went to land that's almost next door to the land that I bought. And I'll just say the way that I ended up buying this land was by following each little breadcrumb and going like, oh, this is what's offering itself. How do I respond to it? I don't know how to do this. I mean, I literally said to the real estate agent, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you please help me? And this is the kind of thing we're not supposed to admit that. Like, I'm not supposed to admit I don't know what I'm doing while I make an offer on land. Or I was like, okay, that's just what's true. And rather than saying, I don't know what I'm doing, I can't do anything, it was like, well, what can I do? How do I keep responding to what's arising, right? As this becomes available, as I don't have the money, but I reach out to my community that I've been bringing to that land and I say, there's an opportunity, to bring this in to be caretaken in our community and then ultimately raise $200,000 in like 2 weeks. And that just came from going like, let's see what's possible, right? If there's this piece of devotion underneath, let's see what's possible. I'm willing to be uncomfortable in service of this and then see what happens in response. And the way that this is woven is that I first came to that land about 20 years ago. It turns out that the previous owners of the land that I bought knew my dad, maybe before I knew my dad, in the early 80s. And you start to feel like the web that is so much larger than any of us. And I think that's what we get to tap into when we tap into those pieces of things like devotion and when we respond to and from that place. And I want to say it looks like magic and it is magic, but it also isn't magic like we often think of it.
The things that stick out from what you just said are the idea of following breadcrumbs, which comes back to that piece of being in the moment,
Yes.
in
Yes.
commitment to something that is bigger,
Yes.
what we're devoted to. And then we have to have that some aspect of embodiment and trust in our own truth.
This reminded me of a piece of this story, which is like, it's like trusting ourselves and trusting the thing that's bigger. So the first time I ever came to that land in Sweat Lodge, I heard a voice. And the voice said, you're meant to bring people to this land. And so I still bring people to that land on retreat every year. And people look at that now and they're like, oh my God, how did you create a sold out retreat at Mount Shasta? And I'm like, well, it wasn't like the voice spoke to me and I said yes to it and then everything went well. I immediately started trying to bring people there. I tried to have a women's retreat that year and I had so few women sign up that I invited men. And there were still only 5 of us. But I didn't say, well, I guess that's not going to happen. Next year, I just said, oh, I'm still supposed to bring people here. Not can I do it, but how do I do it? So that gesture of like, how do I do this, right? And keep being in response to it. And it's not like banging our head against the walls, doing the same thing no matter what, but recognizing when there is a piece that's deeper. So I didn't try to lead my own retreats or women's retreats there again for another 10 years. So it wasn't like, I'm just going to try to do the same thing. I was like, no, I'm meant to bring people. How do I bring people? And staying in that dynamic relationship, like we said at the beginning, everything being in dynamic relationship, and then allowing it to blossom over time.
And what a difference there is between having a vision of something you're committed to as a goal and making it happen and being responsive to the moment with the larger picture of your devotion, like being guided by your devotion. It's qualitatively so different.
Yes. Yeah.
So you lead a lot of other events and a lot of different programs, and some of them you've led for a long time. Do you want to share a little bit about what kind of offerings you have out in the world, either upcoming or ongoingly? And of course, I'll put information in the show notes of ways to connect with you.
I mean, the best way is just to always go to my website. Hopefully you got a good sense of me on this, but like you can also just get a sense of me there. But I would say upcoming, Return to Source, which is at Shasta, is sold out, but it's if somebody knows they want it, like get on the wait list because I do it every year. I'm probably going to do it forever. Who knows, but, and then the kinds of things that we talked about today and really how do we do that in our lives? How do we practically do that? And kind of having a container for that is a lot of what I do in the Fierce Grace Incubator. I'm accepting applications right now. And then in person in September is Pleasure, Purpose, Power Retreat, which, embodiment for women. And it's going to be really, really fun. So that's in Northern California in September.
Thank you so much, Kendra. I really appreciate it. I've loved having this time with you, and I love hearing the magical way that you speak with such nuance, and it's really beautiful. And I appreciate you taking the time to spend this with me today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for asking me.